Hi, I'm Lanny, and this is Preserving Today, a Greener Pastures project. Well, it's time for me to finish up the bone broth that I started the day before yesterday. So I'm showing you how I finish my bone broth. I started a beef broth the evening of the day before yesterday. I let the broth simmer in my Instant Pot for about 15 hours overnight. After it was cool enough to work with yesterday evening, I strained it through a fine mesh strainer into this container, and then I placed it in the fridge overnight again. And this morning, the fat has separated from the broth and is sitting nicely on the top in a semi-solid state. This step helps me separate the fat from my broth before I freeze it. I use my fat for cooking. I prefer to have the fat separated from the broth because then I can control how much fat I want in any given recipe. If I'm using the broth just for sipping, I don't want a greasy oil slick on the top of my broth. I also don't want my soups to be too greasy. So I prefer to start my soups using this same fat, but using the fat to saute the vegetables first before I add the broth in. Now, if you're here locally, you might have been to my Nourishing Bone Broth workshop. I wrote a nice booklet with about 13 recipes of how I use my bone broth and all the information that I could gather about why I make bone broth the way I do and how I'm able to get good results. The in-person Greener Pastures workshops that I've had here on my homestead have been great. It's so fun to get together in person and talk about what I love to do, which is food preservation, cooking from scratch, and just being comfortable in the kitchen. I have big plans to set up a Zoom workshop so that we can get some of our friends that aren't in the area into the homestead kitchen virtually to check out what I do. If you're interested, you can join the mailing list. Just send me an email to greenerpastures@pm.me and let me know that you'd like more information on our workshops that are coming up for Zoom. So I'm just using a regular spoon to gently peel the layer of fat off the top of this broth, and I'm saving it in a jar. It's my goal to get as little as possible of the actual broth in with this. That being, you know what happens when you have oil sit in a pan getting hot and then you add water. Well, it spits and splashes and it can be kind of dangerous. So when you use the fat from this, it's got a lot of moisture in it. So be careful that you heat it slowly and mix things in with it sooner than you would otherwise. Sometimes you want to let oil heat up for a while. This stuff will just start to spit. So I'll usually just start to melt it and then add onions in, and then the spitting isn't a problem. Below that fat is the broth. So I can set that fat aside. I'm going to label it and place it in my fridge and try to use it up kind of quickly because it will go moldy eventually. It doesn't last that long. If I had a lot already in the fridge, I could freeze this in an ice cube tray and then move those ice cubes to a plastic bag once frozen and label it. And then I can just take a cube or two of fat out when I need it. Now, as you can see, this bone broth is jello-like. It is completely gelatinous. It is really, really solid. I call this my extra broth. It's like super condensed, and you could add a little water when you're using it for soups if you wanted to, or use this full strength. This is going to have all the amazing nutrients that you want from those bones and cartilage and skin and connective tissue. All of that is in this broth now. You've got minerals and collagen. It's amazing. This is going to add a really rich, smooth, creamy texture to any soups and stews, chilies, sauces, gravies, whatever I decide to use this for, or just for drinking. Since I quit drinking coffee a few years ago, I like to have a cup of bone broth in the morning. It's soothing and warm and still gives you that morning pause that you get when you have coffee. When I'm making baby food, I'll puree a vegetable and use this as the liquid so that my baby's getting this nourishing bone broth as well, but that it's thickened up in a way where I can serve it to him on a spoon easier than if it was just a liquid. If you want to know more how to get this result from your broth making every time and how to do it in a really easy way and get a routine that fits with your kitchen, I would love to show you what I do, and you could find if that works for you. Stay tuned for more information on the Nourishing Bone Broth workshop that I'll have available online. You'll also receive a PDF copy of the Nourishing Bone Broth booklet that I made. I break down how to do bone broth in a simple to understand way, looking at it as parts. It's a formula to get to this. It makes it so that you can be more intuitive with your cooking and not have to follow an exact recipe. That's always my goal. How do I learn about something and why it works so that I can do it my own way? I'm not good at following rules. I placed all of this bone broth into containers that were 1 pint and 1 quart size. That's 2 cups or 4 cups. Most of my recipes use 4 cups, some use 6 cups. So this makes it easy when I'm making a soup to pull 4 or 6 cups. Or if I'm making something small and I'm making a half batch, I can just pull the 2 cup. I have these amazing things called super cubes. They're silicone, basically ice cube trays that are pre-portioned out to 1 cup size. So I can measure out exactly 1 cup of broth and freeze it. Once that's completely frozen, I can just pop those cubes out, place them into a Ziploc bag, and save them in the freezer. So that if I need just 1 cup of broth, I can just pull the cube out. When I use that, I just throw that in a pan and I heat it up slowly, and that melts the cube. So I don't actually even bother defrosting my broth ahead most of the time. That's it. Now I have all this bone broth in the freezer. I do this a few times a month and set it aside, and I have so much broth in my freezer. It makes it so I have a surplus of what I need. So if I want to take a break from making bone broth, I still have my homemade nourishing extra broth in my freezer. If you have questions or you'd like more information on the upcoming workshops online or in person, contact me at greenerpostures@pm.me. I'm Lanny, and this was Preserving Today, a Greener Postures project.